Hello there, fellow night owls and history enthusiasts. I hope you found your way here tonight, ready to unwind with one of the ancient world's most intriguing puzzles, how the mysterious Oracle of Delphi quietly became the financial powerhouse of the Mediterranean. Before we dive in, if this sounds like something that would help you drift off peacefully while learning something fascinating, go ahead and give this a thumbs up. I'd love to hear in the comments what corner of the world you're joining us from tonight, and whether you're listening at bedtime or perhaps during a quiet afternoon break. There's something wonderfully timeless about gathering to explore the past together, no matter where we are or what time zone we're in. So find your most comfortable position, maybe dim those lights, or close your eyes if you'd like. Tonight, we're not hunting for dramatic battles or legendary heroes. Instead, we're going to quietly investigate something far more subtle but equally remarkable: how a sacred mountain sanctuary evolved into the ancient world's most sophisticated economic hub. Let's settle in for this gentle exploration of Delphi's sacred commerce. Picture yourself standing on the slopes of Mount Parnassus in the 6th century BCE, watching the first light of dawn illuminate the sacred precinct of Apollo. The air is thin and crisp at this altitude, carrying the scent of pine and the faint trace of sulfur from the sacred spring. But as you observe more closely, you notice something remarkable. This isn't just a place of worship. Caravans are arriving from across the known world, laden not just with offerings for the god, but with goods for trade. Persian merchants converse with Egyptian priests, while Etruscan metalworkers examine Scythian goldwork. The sanctuary of Apollo has become something unprecedented in the ancient world, a place where the sacred and the commercial have merged into something entirely new. This transformation didn't happen overnight. In the earliest days of the sanctuary, around the 8th century BCE, Delphi was indeed primarily a religious site. The oracle, that mysterious woman who spoke Apollo's prophecies from her tripod over the sacred chasm, attracted pilgrims seeking divine guidance. But the ancient Greeks possessed a practical wisdom that we sometimes overlook in our romantic notions of their spirituality. They understood that the gods required not just devotion, but material support, and so gradually, almost imperceptibly, the sanctuary began to develop the infrastructure that would make it the economic powerhouse of the ancient world. The genius of Delphi's economic system lay in its recognition of a fundamental truth about human nature. People needed practical reasons to undertake the difficult journey to this remote mountain sanctuary. The oracle's pronouncements provided the spiritual justification, but the sanctuary's administrators created economic incentives that made the pilgrimage profitable as well as pious. They established what we might recognize today as the world's first religious commercial complex, where devotion and profit walked hand in hand up the sacred way. Consider the physical layout of the sanctuary itself. As pilgrims climbed the sacred way toward Apollo's temple, they passed through what was essentially a religious shopping district. The treasuries of various city-states lined the path, small temple-like buildings that housed not just religious offerings, but also served as banks, trading posts, and diplomatic centers. The treasury of the Athenians, with its elegant Doric columns, wasn't just a monument to Athenian piety. It was a practical statement of economic power, a place where Athenian merchants could conduct business under the protection of both their own state and the god Apollo. These treasuries represented one of Delphi's most innovative economic institutions. Each major Greek city-state maintained its own treasury at the sanctuary, which served multiple functions simultaneously. On the surface, they were repositories for offerings to Apollo, gold, silver, precious artifacts, and works of art dedicated to the god. But beneath this religious veneer, they functioned as international banks, safe deposit boxes, and commercial centers. The treasuries held not just sacred objects, but also the commercial wealth of entire cities, protected by both divine sanction and the sanctuary's political neutrality. The economic implications of this system were profound. In an age before modern banking, the treasuries of Delphi provided secure storage for wealth that could be accessed by authorized representatives from each city-state. A merchant from Corinth traveling to Syracuse could deposit funds in the Corinthian treasury at Delphi and withdraw them from Corinthian representatives in Sicily. The sanctuary became, in effect, the first international banking network, with Apollo serving as the ultimate guarantor of commercial transactions. The process of managing these treasuries required unprecedented levels of administrative sophistication. Each treasury maintained detailed records of deposits and withdrawals inscribed on stone tablets that served as permanent receipts. The priests responsible for treasury management developed complex authentication systems to prevent fraud, including sealed documents, personal tokens, and witness requirements. The silver and gold stored in the treasuries was regularly inspected for purity and weight, with standardized measuring systems that became models for commercial practices throughout the Greek world. The daily operations of the treasuries followed strict protocols that had evolved over centuries of experience. Each morning, designated priests would unlock the massive bronze doors using keys that were ceremonially blessed the previous evening. The inventory process was meticulous. Every item had to be accounted for, weighed if necessary, and its condition noted in the permanent records. Deposits required multiple witnesses and careful documentation of the circumstances surrounding each offering. Withdrawals demanded even greater scrutiny, with representatives required to present authentication documents and undergo questioning about their authority to act on behalf of their city-states. The treasuries also served as meeting places for international commerce. The spacious antechambers of the larger treasuries became unofficial trading floors where merchants from different regions could conduct business under the sanctuary's protection. These spaces were designed with both function and symbolism in mind. High ceilings that conveyed the majesty of divine protection, while practical features like stone benches, writing surfaces, and secure storage areas facilitated actual commercial transactions. But the treasuries were just one layer of Delphi's economic complexity. The sanctuary also developed a sophisticated system for managing the constant flow of offerings and payments that poured in from across the Greek world. The Delphic Amphictyonic, the League of City-States that jointly administered the sanctuary, created what was essentially the first recorded example of international financial cooperation. Representatives from 12 different regions met regularly to oversee the sanctuary's finances, establish rules for commercial activity, and resolve disputes between trading partners. The Amphictyonic meetings were marvels of ancient diplomacy and commerce. Delegates would arrive at Delphi with carefully prepared accounts of their region's contributions to the sanctuary, detailed records of commercial disputes requiring resolution, and proposals for new trading arrangements. The meetings combined religious ceremony with practical business, beginning each session with sacrifices to Apollo and ending with binding agreements that carried both divine and legal authority. The proceedings were recorded on bronze tablets and stored in the temple archives, creating a permanent record of ancient commercial law. These gatherings took place twice yearly, coinciding with the major religious festivals that brought the largest numbers of pilgrims to the sanctuary. The spring meeting, held during the Pythian Games, focused primarily on religious and ceremonial matters, but also addressed urgent commercial disputes that required immediate resolution. The autumn meeting was more business-oriented, dealing with treasury management, trade regulations, and long-term economic planning for the sanctuary's operations. The delegates to these meetings represented not just political entities, but economic interests as well. Each region's representatives included not only government officials, but also merchants, bankers, and craftsmen who could speak knowledgeably about commercial conditions and trade opportunities. This blend of political and economic expertise enabled the Amphictyonic to make decisions that were both diplomatically sound and commercially viable. The scale of wealth flowing through Delphi was staggering by ancient standards. Herodotus records that the Lydian king Croesus alone sent offerings worth hundreds of talents of gold and silver, the equivalent of several modern fortunes. But Croesus was just one of thousands of wealthy individuals and city-states who sent regular offerings to the sanctuary. The Persian king Darius, despite his conflicts with the Greeks, made substantial donations to Delphi. Egyptian pharaohs sent exotic goods and precious metals. Even barbarian chieftains from beyond the known world sent offerings to Apollo, drawn by the sanctuary's reputation for divine power, and, perhaps more practically, by the commercial opportunities it provided. The management of these vast offerings required the development of sophisticated accounting systems. The sanctuary's priests created detailed inventories of every item received, noting not just its monetary value, but also its origin, the circumstances of its dedication, and any special religious or legal conditions attached to it. Some offerings came with specific instructions about their use: funds designated for particular construction projects, loans to be made at specific interest rates, or annual payments to support certain religious ceremonies. The priests had to balance these various obligations while maintaining the sanctuary's overall financial health. The accounting practices at Delphi were remarkably advanced for their time. The priests used a double-entry system that tracked both the physical location of items and their assigned purposes. Sacred objects were catalogued separately from commercial assets, but both categories were subject to regular audits by the Amphictyonic Council. The records were maintained in multiple copies, with one set stored in each major treasury and master copies kept in the temple archives. This redundancy helped prevent fraud and ensured that accurate records would survive even if individual treasuries were damaged or compromised. The sanctuary also developed sophisticated methods for valuing non-monetary offerings. Works of art, exotic animals, rare spices, and other unusual gifts required expert appraisal to determine their worth for accounting purposes. The sanctuary maintained a staff of specialists who could evaluate everything from Persian carpets to Ethiopian ivory, establishing standardized procedures for converting diverse offerings into common units of value. These valuations were crucial for tax purposes, as city-states were required to contribute specific amounts to the sanctuary's operations based on their overall economic capacity. The oracle herself played a crucial role in this economic system, though probably not in the way most people imagine. While we tend to focus on her famous political prophecies, the ambiguous pronouncements that guided Greek cities through wars and crises, much of her day-to-day work involved what we might call economic consulting. Merchants sought divine guidance about trade routes, farmers asked about crop planting, and craftsmen inquired about the best times to launch new ventures. The oracle's pronouncements, delivered through the Pythia in her divinely inspired trance, carried such authority that they could make or break commercial enterprises across the Mediterranean. The oracle's economic advice was remarkably sophisticated, reflecting the sanctuary's access to information from across the ancient world. When a merchant from Massalia asked about establishing a new trade route to the Black Sea, the Pythia's response would be informed by reports from dozens of other traders, diplomatic intelligence from various city-states, and careful analysis of political conditions along the proposed route. The religious language of the prophecy might obscure this practical foundation, but the underlying advice was often remarkably sound. The process of consulting the oracle involved considerable expense and ceremony, which itself contributed to the sanctuary's economic activity. Petitioners had to pay substantial fees for the privilege of asking questions, with rates varying based on the complexity of the inquiry and the social status of the questioner. Wealthy merchants and city-states paid premium rates for private consultations, while ordinary citizens could participate in group sessions at reduced costs. These fee structures helped ensure that the oracle's services were accessible to different economic classes while maximizing revenue for the sanctuary. The oracle's consultations followed elaborate ritual procedures that had both religious and commercial significance. Petitioners first had to undergo purification ceremonies, which involved purchasing special offerings and hiring priests to perform the necessary rituals. They then presented their questions in written form, often inscribed on expensive materials like silver tablets or fine papyrus. The oracle's responses were delivered orally but later transcribed onto permanent records, with copies provided to the petitioners for a fee. This entire process generated substantial revenue while maintaining the religious dignity of the proceedings. This religious authority gave Delphi enormous economic leverage. The sanctuary could effectively regulate trade by declaring certain practices impious or by blessing others with divine approval. When disputes arose between trading partners, the oracle's judgment was final and binding. This created a system of commercial law backed by religious authority, a precursor to modern commercial arbitration, but with the added weight of divine sanction. The sanctuary's judicial functions extended beyond simple dispute resolution to include complex questions of commercial law and business ethics. Merchants who felt they had been cheated could bring their cases to the oracle, who would render judgments based on divine wisdom rather than human legal precedents. These decisions often established new principles that influenced commercial practices throughout the ancient world. The oracle's pronouncements on matters like fair pricing, honest weights and measures, and proper treatment of business partners became part of the informal commercial code that governed Mediterranean trade. The enforcement of the oracle's commercial judgments relied on a combination of religious sanctions and practical consequences. Merchants who violated oracle-sanctioned agreements faced not only divine retribution, but also exclusion from the sanctuary's commercial networks. Since these networks were essential for long-distance trade, such exclusion could effectively end a merchant's career. This powerful deterrent helped maintain high standards of commercial conduct among traders who operated under the sanctuary's protection. The sanctuary's economic influence extended far beyond its own boundaries through an institution known as the Delphic Amphictyonic. This league of city-states, originally formed to protect the sanctuary, evolved into something resembling a modern trade organization. The Amphictyonic established common standards for weights and measures, regulated currency exchange rates, and provided a forum for resolving commercial disputes. Merchants operating under Amphictyonic protection could trade across the Greek world with confidence, knowing that their contracts would be enforceable and their property rights respected. The standardization efforts of the Amphictyony were particularly important in an era when every city-state had its own system of weights, measures, and currency. A merchant traveling from Athens to Corinth to Sparta would encounter 3 different systems for measuring grain, 3 different standards for weighing precious metals, and 3 different currencies with constantly fluctuating exchange rates. The Amphictyony worked to harmonize these systems, creating common standards that facilitated trade across political boundaries. The process of standardization was gradual and often contentious. City-states were reluctant to abandon their traditional systems, which were often designed to give local merchants advantages over foreign competitors. The Amphictyony had to balance these competing interests while maintaining the religious authority that gave its decisions legitimacy. The solution was typically to establish parallel systems, local standards for domestic trade and Amphictyonic standards for international commerce conducted under the sanctuary's protection. The practical implementation of standardized measures required extensive infrastructure development. The Amphictyony established official weights and measures depositories in major trading centers throughout the Greek world, where merchants could verify the accuracy of their measuring instruments. These depositories were staffed by certified officials who had been trained at Delphi and were responsible for maintaining the integrity of the standard system. Regular inspections ensured that local weights and measures remained consistent with the Amphictyonic standards. The Amphictyony also created one of the earliest examples of international commercial law. The sacred truces that protected pilgrims traveling to Delphi were extended to cover merchants and their goods. This meant that even during times of war, commercial activity could continue under the sanctuary's protection. Caravans bearing the sacred symbols of Apollo could pass safely through hostile territory, creating what amounted to protected trade corridors across the ancient world. These sacred trade corridors were maintained through a complex network of agreements between the sanctuary and various political authorities. Local rulers who respected the sanctuary's protection were rewarded with favorable trade terms and diplomatic recognition. Those who violated the sacred truces faced not just divine retribution, but also economic sanctions enforced by the Amphictyonic League. The system created powerful incentives for maintaining peaceful commerce even during periods of political conflict. The practical implementation of sacred protection required careful attention to detail. Merchants seeking Amphictyonic protection had to register their caravans at the sanctuary, pay specific fees, and accept certain obligations regarding their conduct during travel. They received official documents bearing the sanctuary's seal, special symbols to display on their goods and vehicles, and detailed instructions about the routes they were authorized to use. Violations of these agreements could result in loss of protection and exclusion from future trading privileges. The registration process involved thorough documentation of the merchant's identity, business affiliations, and intended travel plans. The sanctuary maintained detailed records of all registered traders, including their credit histories, previous violations of sanctuary rules, and assessments of their reliability and character. This information database became an invaluable resource for other merchants seeking trustworthy business partners and for sanctuary officials evaluating new applications for protection. But perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of Delphi's economic system was its approach to monetary policy. The sanctuary minted its own coins, the famous Delphic drachmas bearing the image of Apollo and his sacred tripod. These coins were accepted throughout the Greek world and beyond, not just because of their silver content, but because of the religious and commercial authority they represented. The sanctuary's coiners were renowned for their skill and honesty, and Delphic silver became a standard of value across the Mediterranean. The minting operations at Delphi were carefully regulated to maintain the coin's reputation for purity and weight. The sanctuary employed master craftsmen who had trained in the most advanced minting centers of the ancient world, including Lydia, where coinage had first been invented. The dies used to strike Delphic coins were works of art in themselves, featuring intricate designs that were difficult to counterfeit. The silver used in the coins came from carefully selected mines, with each batch tested for purity before being accepted for minting. The design of Delphic coins conveyed important economic and religious messages. The obverse typically featured Apollo's head in profile, emphasizing the divine authority behind the currency. The reverse showed the sacred tripod, symbolizing the oracle's prophetic power and the sanctuary's role as a source of divine wisdom. Some special issues included additional symbols representing particular city-states or commemorating significant events, creating numismatic records of the sanctuary's relationships with various political and economic entities. The production process for Delphic coins involved multiple quality control steps. Raw silver was first refined using advanced techniques that removed impurities while preserving maximum weight. The refined metal was then alloyed with small amounts of other metals to achieve the optimal hardness and durability. Each coin blank was individually weighed and adjusted before striking, ensuring consistent weight across entire production runs. The finished coins were randomly selected for additional testing to verify their conformity to official standards. The sanctuary also pioneered what we might recognize as foreign exchange operations. With pilgrims and merchants arriving from across the known world, each carrying their own local currencies, Delphi needed a system for converting various forms of money into usable value. The sanctuary's money changers, operating under divine protection and strict regulation, established exchange rates that became standard across the ancient world. They dealt not just in coined money, but in the various forms of commodity money that dominated ancient trade: gold dust, silver ingots, precious stones, and even standardized quantities of grain and oil. The money-changing operations were conducted in a special area of the sanctuary, with permanent booths arranged around a central courtyard. Each booth was assigned to specialists from different regions who were familiar with the currencies and commercial practices of their homelands. A merchant from Egypt could exchange his gold rings for Athenian owls, while a Scythian trader could convert his silver bars into Corinthian staters. The exchange rates were posted daily on bronze tablets and supervised by sanctuary officials to prevent fraud. The calculation of exchange rates involved sophisticated economic analysis that took into account factors like metal content, local demand, political stability, and seasonal variations in trade patterns. The sanctuary's money changers maintained extensive records of rate fluctuations and used this data to predict future trends. They also corresponded with counterparts in other trading centers to coordinate their activities and ensure that exchange rates remained consistent across different markets. The money-changing service extended beyond simple currency conversion to include complex financial transactions, like letters of credit and international transfers. A merchant could deposit funds at Delphi and receive documents that allowed him to withdraw equivalent amounts at partner institutions in distant cities. This early form of banking facilitated long-distance trade by eliminating the need to transport large amounts of precious metals across dangerous routes. This monetary sophistication extended to the sanctuary's lending operations. The treasuries didn't just store wealth, They also loaned it out at interest, creating what may have been the world's first religious banking system. The rates were regulated by the Amphictyonic and guaranteed by the sanctuary's sacred authority. Defaulting on a loan from Apollo's treasury wasn't just a commercial failure, it was a sacrilege that could result in divine punishment and social ostracism. The lending operations were structured to serve both religious and commercial purposes. Loans to fund temple construction or religious ceremonies carried lower interest rates and more flexible repayment terms. Commercial loans for trading ventures were charged market rates but came with the sanctuary's guarantee of the borrower's good faith. The most prestigious loans were those made to city-states for public works projects, which carried both economic and diplomatic significance. The sanctuary's lending practices also reflected sophisticated risk assessment. Loans to established merchants with good reputations carried lower rates than those to newcomers. Loans secured by valuable collateral were preferred over unsecured credit. The sanctuary maintained detailed records of borrowers' payment histories and used this information to guide future lending decisions. Default rates were remarkably low, partly because of the religious sanctions, but also because of careful screening of potential borrowers. The loan application process required extensive documentation of the borrower's financial condition, business plans, and collateral offerings. Applicants had to provide references from other merchants or city officials who could vouch for their character and reliability. The sanctuary's priests conducted thorough investigations of each application, sometimes sending representatives to the applicant's home city to verify the information provided. This careful vetting process helped maintain the high quality of the sanctuary's loan portfolio. The economic activities at Delphi also fostered technological innovation. The constant flow of merchants, craftsmen, and scholars from across the known world created a unique environment for the exchange of ideas and techniques. The sanctuary's workshops, which produced the elaborate dedications and religious artifacts that filled the treasuries, became centers of artistic and technical innovation. Metalworkers from different regions shared their techniques, creating new alloys and decorative methods. Architects and engineers collaborated on the construction of increasingly elaborate temples and treasuries, pushing the boundaries of ancient building technology. The workshops at Delphi were organized along guild lines, with master craftsmen taking apprentices from various backgrounds. A young Greek metalworker might learn Persian techniques for inlaying gold, while an Egyptian stone carver could master Greek methods for creating realistic sculpture. This cultural exchange, facilitated by the sanctuary's international character, contributed to the development of new artistic styles that combined elements from multiple traditions. The technological innovations developed at Delphi spread throughout the ancient world through the sanctuary's extensive commercial networks. A new method for purifying silver, perfected in the sanctuary's mints, would be carried to other cities by traveling merchants. An improved design for architectural joints developed during the construction of a new treasury would appear in buildings across the Mediterranean. The sanctuary became a center for technological diffusion as well as commercial exchange. The workshop system also facilitated the development of new production techniques that increased efficiency and reduced costs. The large scale of operations at Delphi created opportunities for specialization and division of labor that were impossible in smaller workshops. Different craftsmen could focus on specific aspects of production, developing expertise that improved both quality and speed. These innovations were particularly important in metalworking, where the sanctuary's output of coins, jewelry, and decorative objects required consistent high quality and rapid production. The sanctuary's economic influence was particularly evident in its role as an information hub. In an age before newspapers or telecommunications, Delphi served as a clearinghouse for commercial intelligence. Merchants gathered there not just to trade goods, but to exchange information about market conditions, political developments, and trading opportunities. The oracle's pronouncements, while couched in religious language, often contained practical economic advice based on the sanctuary's unparalleled access to information from across the ancient world. The information gathering at Delphi was systematic and comprehensive. The sanctuary maintained a network of contacts in major cities throughout the Mediterranean, including priests, merchants, and diplomatic representatives who reported regularly on local conditions. This information was compiled by the sanctuary's administrators and used to inform both the oracle's pronouncements and the Amphictyoni's policy decisions. The quality of this intelligence network was one of the sanctuary's most valuable assets. The information network operated through a combination of formal and informal channels. Official diplomatic correspondence provided data on political developments and government policies that might affect trade. Merchant reports offered insights into market conditions, commodity prices, and commercial opportunities. Religious pilgrims contributed information about local conditions in their home regions, often providing early warning of potential problems or opportunities. The processing and analysis of this information required considerable expertise. The sanctuary employed scholars and administrators who specialized in interpreting economic data and identifying significant trends. They maintained extensive archives of historical information that could be used to put current developments in context. This analytical capability enabled the sanctuary to provide sophisticated economic advice to its clients and to anticipate changes that might affect its own operations. The dissemination of information was equally important. Merchants leaving Delphi carried with them not just goods and money, but also news and intelligence about conditions in distant markets. A trader heading to the Black Sea might receive detailed information about grain harvests in Egypt, while a merchant bound for Sicily could learn about political developments in Syracuse. This information flow helped to integrate the ancient Mediterranean economy in ways that would not be seen again until the modern era. This information network gave Delphi significant influence over ancient trade patterns. The sanctuary's priests and administrators, through their network of contacts and their access to the oracle's pronouncements, could effectively direct commercial activity towards certain regions or away from others. A favorable prophecy could open new trade routes, while an unfavorable one could shut them down. This power was exercised with considerable discretion, but it made Delphi a crucial factor in the ancient world's economic development. The sanctuary's economic success also created unexpected social changes. The constant influx of wealth attracted not just merchants and pilgrims, but also scholars, artists, and intellectuals. Delphi became a cosmopolitan center where people from different cultures interacted on a regular basis. This cultural mixing, facilitated by the sanctuary's economic activities, contributed to the spread of ideas, technologies, and artistic styles across the ancient world. The social impact of Delphi's economic activities extended to the local population as well. The sanctuary employed hundreds of people in various capacities: priests, administrators, craftsmen, guards, servants, and laborers. The steady flow of pilgrims and merchants created demand for lodging, food, transportation, and other services. Local families grew wealthy by providing these services, while farmers in the surrounding region prospered by supplying food and materials to the sanctuary. The economic opportunities created by the sanctuary also attracted permanent residents from across the ancient world. Foreign merchants established permanent representatives at Delphi to manage their business interests. Craftsmen from distant regions settled near the sanctuary to take advantage of the steady demand for their skills. Scholars and philosophers were drawn by the intellectual stimulation of the cosmopolitan environment and the sanctuary's extensive library. This permanent foreign population added to Delphi's international character and contributed to its role as a center of cultural exchange. The residential areas that developed around the sanctuary reflected this cultural diversity. Different ethnic groups tended to cluster in specific neighborhoods, creating distinct districts with their own characteristic architecture, customs, and commercial specialties. The Persian quarter was known for its luxury goods and exotic spices, while the Egyptian district specialized in fine textiles and precious stones. These ethnic enclaves contributed to the sanctuary's economic diversity, while maintaining the cultural traditions that made their products distinctive. The Persian Wars of the early 5th century BCE provided a dramatic test of Delphi's economic system. As Persian armies threatened to overrun Greece, many questioned whether the sanctuary's wealth and influence could survive such upheaval. The oracle's response to this crisis was both religiously profound and economically astute. Her famous pronouncement that the Greeks should trust in their wooden walls, interpreted as the Athenian fleet, proved to be both prophetically accurate and commercially sound advice. The sanctuary's handling of the Persian crisis demonstrated the sophisticated political calculations that underlay its economic operations. While maintaining diplomatic relationships with the Persian Empire, the sanctuary also supported Greek resistance efforts. The oracle's pronouncements encouraged Greek unity while avoiding direct confrontation with Persian power. This delicate balance allowed the sanctuary to preserve its wealth and influence regardless of the war's outcome. The actual conduct of the war created both challenges and opportunities for Delphi's economic system. The movement of armies disrupted traditional trade routes, but also created demand for weapons, supplies, and financial services. The sanctuary's treasuries provided loans to Greek cities for military preparations, while its information networks helped coordinate resistance efforts. The sacred truces that protected pilgrims and merchants were extended to cover refugees and military supplies, turning Delphi into a crucial logistical hub for the Greek war effort. The sanctuary's financial support for the Greek war effort involved substantial risks. Loans to city-states for military purposes carried the possibility of total loss if the Greeks were defeated. The sanctuary's administrators had to balance their religious obligations to support the Greek cause against their fiduciary responsibilities to preserve the sanctuary's wealth. They managed this challenge by diversifying their support across multiple city-states and by maintaining reserve funds that could ensure the sanctuary's survival, even if some loans were never repaid. In the aftermath of the Persian Wars, Delphi's economic importance actually increased. The sanctuary became a crucial element in the reconstruction of war-damaged Greek cities, providing loans and organizing relief efforts. The treasuries, which had safeguarded the wealth of Greek cities during the crisis, now funded the rebuilding of temples, harbors, and public buildings across the Greek world. The sanctuary's economic network, which had maintained commercial contacts even during the war, helped restore trade routes and commercial relationships. The victory celebrations that followed the Persian defeat brought unprecedented wealth to Delphi. The Greeks dedicated enormous quantities of captured Persian treasure to Apollo, including gold, silver, precious stones, and elaborate works of art. The famous serpent column, made from the bronze of melted Persian weapons, became a symbol of both Greek victory and the sanctuary's role in preserving Greek independence. These victory dedications marked the peak of Delphi's wealth and influence in the ancient world. The management of these victory offerings required new administrative procedures. The sheer volume of treasure overwhelmed the sanctuary's existing storage facilities, necessitating the construction of additional treasuries and the development of new cataloging systems. The artistic and historical value of many offerings required special preservation methods to ensure their long-term survival. The sanctuary's curators developed innovative techniques for cleaning, repairing, and displaying these precious artifacts. The rise of Athens as a major power in the 5th century BCE created new challenges and opportunities for Delphi's economic system. The Athenian Empire's control over maritime trade routes could have threatened the sanctuary's commercial role, but instead, Athens chose to work within the Delphic system. The Athenian treasury at Delphi became one of the most elaborate and well-funded, serving as a tangible symbol of Athens's respect for the sanctuary's economic authority. The relationship between Athens and Delphi illustrated the sanctuary's ability to adapt to changing political circumstances while maintaining its economic independence. Athens needed the sanctuary's commercial networks and information systems to manage its far-flung empire, while Delphi benefited from Athenian wealth and protection. The two institutions developed a mutually beneficial relationship that enhanced both Athenian power and Delphic influence. The Athenian connection also brought new forms of wealth to Delphi. The tribute payments that flowed into Athens from its subject cities were partly redirected to the sanctuary in the form of religious offerings and commercial investments. Athenian merchants, backed by imperial wealth, became major participants in Delphi's commercial networks. The sanctuary's workshops began producing goods in the distinctive Athenian style, while its mints experimented with new coin designs that reflected Athenian influence. The relationship between Athens and Delphi also illustrated the sanctuary's ability to balance competing interests. While Athens was Delphi's most powerful patron, the sanctuary maintained its independence and continued to serve the interests of all Greek city-states. This delicate political balance was essential to the sanctuary's economic success, as it ensured that merchants and city-states from across the Greek world continued to trust Delphi's neutrality and authority. The sanctuary's economic influence extended beyond the Greek world through its relationships with foreign powers. The Lydian kings, beginning with Gyges and culminating with Croesus, sent enormous offerings to Delphi, not just out of religious devotion, but as part of a deliberate strategy to gain access to Greek commercial networks. The Persian kings, despite their political conflicts with the Greeks, maintained diplomatic and commercial relationships with Delphi, recognizing the sanctuary's economic importance. These foreign relationships created interesting tensions within the sanctuary's economic system. How could Apollo's priests accept offerings from enemies of the Greek city-states? How could the sanctuary maintain its neutrality while clearly benefiting from the conflicts between different powers? These questions forced the development of increasingly sophisticated diplomatic and commercial protocols, as the sanctuary sought to balance its religious obligations with its economic interests. The answers lay partly in the sanctuary's understanding of its own divine mission. Apollo was not just a Greek god. He was a universal deity whose wisdom and protection could benefit all humanity. This theological position provided the foundation for an economic policy that welcomed participants from across the known world, regardless of their political affiliations. The sanctuary's wealth and influence grew precisely because it transcended the narrow boundaries of individual city-states or ethnic groups. The universal character of Apollo's protection also created opportunities for diplomatic innovation. The sanctuary served as a neutral meeting ground where representatives of hostile powers could negotiate under divine protection. Commercial disputes between different ethnic groups could be resolved through the sanctuary's arbitration system. Even during periods of intense political conflict, the sanctuary maintained its role as a facilitator of international commerce and diplomacy. The practical implementation of this universal approach required careful attention to cultural sensitivities. The sanctuary's priests developed expertise in the customs and religious practices of various foreign cultures, allowing them to conduct ceremonies and business dealings in ways that respected different traditions. The sanctuary's architectural and artistic programs incorporated elements from multiple cultures, creating a visual environment that welcomed participants from diverse backgrounds. The long-term success of Delphi's economic system depended on its ability to evolve with changing circumstances while maintaining its core functions. As the ancient world became more interconnected, the sanctuary adapted its services to meet new needs. When Alexander the Great's conquests opened new trade routes to the east, Delphi established connections with merchants and rulers in distant lands. When Roman power began to challenge Greek independence, the sanctuary carefully cultivated relationships with Roman leaders while maintaining its traditional Greek character. The sanctuary's adaptability was particularly evident in its response to technological and social changes. When new forms of currency appeared, Delphi's money changers learned to handle them. When new trading practices developed, the sanctuary's commercial law evolved to accommodate them. When political boundaries shifted, the sanctuary's diplomatic protocols adjusted to new realities. This flexibility, combined with the sanctuary's fundamental commitment to religious authority and commercial integrity, allowed it to remain relevant and influential for centuries. As we drift deeper into this ancient world, we can almost hear the gentle bustle of commerce mixing with the sacred rituals of worship, the soft clink of silver coins being counted in the treasuries, the quiet conversations of merchants negotiating deals in the shadow of Apollo's temple, the rustle of silk, and the gleam of gold as offerings are presented to the god. This wasn't the crude materialism we might expect from our modern perspective, but rather a sophisticated understanding that the sacred and the commercial could enhance each other when properly balanced. The evening mist begins to rise from the sacred spring, carrying with it the mysteries of an ancient world where divine wisdom and practical commerce walked hand in hand up the sacred way. The oracle's voice grows fainter as the day ends, but the economic legacy of Delphi continues to echo through the centuries, reminding us that even the most sacred places must find ways to sustain themselves in the material world. The treasuries stand silent now, their marble columns pale in the moonlight, but within their walls rests the accumulated wealth of generations, not just gold and silver, but the trust and cooperation that made possible the ancient world's most sophisticated commercial system. The sacred and the secular have found their perfect balance here, where Apollo's wisdom guides not just the souls of pilgrims, but the practical decisions of merchants and the economic policies of city-states. As you feel yourself settling into this ancient rhythm, let your mind wander through the colonnades of the treasuries, past the gleaming dedications of grateful city-states, up the sacred way toward Apollo's temple. The economic complexities of Delphi fade into the gentle whisper of evening breeze through the pine trees, the distant sound of merchants securing their caravans for the night, the peaceful certainty that tomorrow will bring new pilgrims, new offerings, new opportunities for the sacred and the commercial to find their perfect balance. Feel yourself becoming part of this ancient world, where the wisdom of the gods and the practical needs of humanity were not opposing forces, but complementary aspects of a single, harmonious system. Let the gentle weight of silver coins in your palm remind you of the tangible benefits of divine favor, while the sweet scent of incense carries your thoughts beyond the material world toward the eternal mysteries that no amount of wealth can purchase. The treasuries are locked for the night, their golden contents safe under Apollo's protection. The merchants have found comfortable lodging in the guest houses that line the sacred way, their rooms warmed by braziers filled with aromatic wood from the sacred groves. In these simple chambers, Egyptian traders unfold silk wrappings to reveal precious gems, while Persian merchants carefully count gold darics by lamplight. The conversations flow in a dozen languages. Phoenician sailors sharing news of distant ports, Scythian horsemen describing the wealth of the northern steppes, Etruscan metalworkers discussing new techniques for working bronze and iron. The sanctuary's guest houses themselves represent another facet of Delphi's economic sophistication. These weren't simple hostels, but carefully planned facilities designed to accommodate the diverse needs of international travelers. The rooms varied in size and luxury, from modest chambers for ordinary pilgrims to elaborate suites for visiting royalty. Each guest house maintained its own staff of interpreters, cooks familiar with different dietary requirements, and servants trained in the customs of various cultures. The rates were carefully calculated to generate revenue while remaining accessible to travelers from different economic backgrounds. The evening meal service in these guest houses created yet another opportunity for cultural and commercial exchange. Merchants would gather in the common dining areas, sharing not just food, but information about market conditions, political developments, and trading opportunities. A Syrian spice dealer might learn about demand for his goods in distant Gaul, while a Greek wine merchant could discover new markets opening in the Black Sea region. These informal exchanges often led to formal business partnerships and joint ventures that extended the sanctuary's economic influence far beyond its physical boundaries. The night watch at Delphi followed ancient protocols that reflected both security concerns and religious obligations. Armed guards patrolled the sacred way and the treasury complex, but their duties extended beyond simple protection. They monitored the activities of late-arriving merchants, ensuring that commercial transactions followed proper procedures even during the nighttime hours. The guards were themselves carefully selected from among the sanctuary's most trusted employees, often drawn from families that had served the sanctuary for generations. The security arrangements at Delphi were necessarily complex, given the enormous wealth concentrated in a relatively small area. The treasuries were protected by multiple layers of defense, massive bronze doors, secured with intricate lock mechanisms, guard posts positioned at strategic points, and alarm systems that could quickly summon reinforcements. But perhaps the most effective protection came from the sanctuary's religious authority. The fear of divine retribution was often more powerful than any physical barrier in deterring potential thieves or vandals. As the night deepens, the sanctuary takes on a different character. The daytime bustle of commerce and pilgrimage gives way to a quieter rhythm, focused on religious observance and scholarly activity. In the temple archives, priest scholars work by lamplight, copying important documents and maintaining the extensive records that document the sanctuary's economic and diplomatic activities. These scribes are among the most educated people in the ancient world, fluent in multiple languages and skilled in various writing systems. Their work preserves not just commercial contracts and religious dedications, but also literary works, scientific treatises, and historical chronicles that would otherwise be lost. The temple library at Delphi housed one of the ancient world's most comprehensive collections of written knowledge. The sanctuary's wealth and international connections enabled it to acquire texts from across the known world: Egyptian medical treatises, Babylonian astronomical observations, Persian historical chronicles, and Greek philosophical works. This intellectual treasure was as valuable as the gold and silver in the treasuries, representing centuries of accumulated human knowledge and wisdom. The library's collection grew through various means. Some texts arrived as offerings from grateful city-states or wealthy individuals. Others were purchased by the sanctuary's agents during their travels to distant lands. The most valuable additions were often unique works created specifically for the sanctuary, commissioned histories, scientific studies, and literary compositions that could be found nowhere else. The sanctuary's scholars also produced original works, combining information from multiple sources to create new syntheses of knowledge. The preservation and copying of these manuscripts required specialized skills and expensive materials. The sanctuary maintained workshops where scribes produced copies of important texts using carefully prepared papyrus and parchment. The inks were made from rare materials, precious metals ground into powder, exotic dyes imported from distant lands, and special preparations that would resist fading over time. The most important documents were copied multiple times and stored in different locations to ensure their survival. The intellectual activity at Delphi extended beyond simple preservation to include active research and scholarship. The sanctuary's scholars corresponded with learned individuals throughout the ancient world, exchanging ideas and information on topics ranging from astronomy to agriculture. These scholarly networks paralleled the commercial networks that connected the sanctuary to distant markets, creating channels for the exchange of knowledge as well as goods. In the workshops surrounding the sanctuary, master craftsmen continued their work even into the evening hours. The production of religious artifacts and commercial goods required careful attention to detail that often extended beyond normal working hours. Goldsmiths worked by the light of carefully positioned lamps, creating intricate jewelry and decorative objects. Bronze workers tended their furnaces, maintaining the precise temperatures required for complex alloys. Stone carvers put finishing touches on sculptures and architectural elements that would adorn the ever-expanding sanctuary complex. The workshop system at Delphi represented a unique fusion of artistic tradition and commercial innovation. The craftsmen working there were simultaneously artists, technicians, and entrepreneurs. They created objects that served religious purposes while also developing new techniques and designs that had commercial applications. A goldsmith working on a ritual vessel might discover a new alloy that proved useful for jewelry making. An architect designing a treasury might develop structural innovations that could be applied to other building projects. The training of apprentices in these workshops followed time-honored traditions that ensured the transmission of skills from one generation to the next. Young craftsmen learned not just technical skills, but also the commercial aspects of their trades. They studied the preferences of different markets, learned to assess the quality of raw materials, and developed the business skills necessary to manage their own workshops eventually. This comprehensive education produced craftsmen who could succeed in the competitive commercial environment of the ancient Mediterranean. The seasonal rhythms at Delphi created patterns of activity that reflected both religious observances and commercial cycles. The major festivals brought the largest crowds of pilgrims and merchants, creating intense periods of activity followed by quieter times devoted to administrative work and maintenance. The spring Pythian Games attracted competitors and spectators from across the Greek world, while the autumn Theophania drew pilgrims seeking special religious experiences. These seasonal variations required careful planning and resource management to ensure that the sanctuary could accommodate varying demands. The Pythian Games, held every 4 years, represented the culmination of Delphi's role as a center of both religious and cultural activity. The competitions included not just athletic events, but also musical and poetic contests that attracted the finest artists of the ancient world. The prizes for these competitions were valuable in themselves, but the prestige of victory at Delphi was even more important. Winners often received patronage from wealthy sponsors and invitations to perform at courts throughout the Mediterranean. The economic impact of the Pythian Games extended far beyond the immediate revenues generated by entry fees and spectator spending. The gathering provided unparalleled opportunities for networking and business development. Merchants could establish relationships with potential customers from across the known world. Craftsmen could display their finest work to audiences that included royalty and wealthy collectors. Scholars could present their research to colleagues and seek support for future projects. The infrastructure required to support these massive gatherings was itself a testament to Delphi's economic sophistication. Temporary structures had to be erected to provide additional accommodation and commercial space. Food supplies had to be organized to feed thousands of visitors. Transportation systems had to be coordinated to move people and goods efficiently. The sanctuary's administrators had developed detailed procedures for managing these logistics, drawing on centuries of experience in hosting large-scale events. The quiet hours before dawn at Delphi were devoted to preparation for the coming day's activities. Priests performed the preliminary rituals that would ensure divine favor for the day's commercial and religious activities. Temple servants cleaned and prepared the sacred spaces for the day's ceremonies. Kitchen staff began the complex process of preparing meals for hundreds of guests with varied dietary requirements and cultural preferences. The daily routine of temple administration required coordination between religious and commercial functions that might seem contradictory to modern sensibilities. The same priests who conducted sacred ceremonies also supervised commercial transactions. The treasuries that housed religious offerings also served as banks and trading centers. The oracle, who delivered divine prophecies, also provided practical business advice. This integration of sacred and secular activities was so complete that the ancient Greeks saw no contradiction between them. The sanctuary's influence on regional economic development extended to the surrounding communities that depended on the constant flow of visitors. Local farmers specialized in producing the types of food that pilgrims and merchants preferred, creating agricultural systems that served markets hundreds of miles away. Village craftsmen developed skills that complemented those of the sanctuary workshops, producing goods that were distinctive but compatible with Delphic products. Transportation specialists created systems for moving people and goods efficiently between the sanctuary and distant destinations. The road networks that connected Delphi to the outside world were themselves marvels of ancient engineering and economic cooperation. The sacred way within the sanctuary was just the final segment of a transportation system that extended across the entire Mediterranean world. These roads were maintained through the cooperative efforts of multiple city-states, each responsible for segments within their territory, but all following common standards established by the Amphictyonic League. The maintenance of these road networks required substantial financial resources and sophisticated organizational systems. Funding came from a combination of sources, tolls paid by commercial users, contributions from city-states that benefited from the traffic, and direct investment by the sanctuary itself. The actual work was performed by specialized crews that moved from segment to segment, ensuring consistent quality and maintenance standards throughout the network. As the first light of dawn begins to touch the peaks of Mount Parnassus, the sanctuary stirs to life once again. The night's quiet contemplation gives way to the purposeful activity of another day, devoted to the harmonious integration of divine wisdom and human commerce. The treasuries will soon be unlocked, the oracle will begin her consultations, and merchants from across the known world will continue the ancient dance of exchange that has made Delphi the economic heart of the Mediterranean. But for now, in these peaceful moments before the day's activities begin, we can appreciate the profound achievement that Delphi represents. Here, in this remote mountain sanctuary, the ancient Greeks created something unprecedented in human history, a system that successfully integrated religious authority with commercial activity, creating prosperity while maintaining spiritual integrity. The sanctuary's success depended not on the exploitation of any single group or resource, but on the creation of mutual benefits that encouraged participation from across the known world. The gentle morning breeze carries the sound of temple bells calling the faithful to their first prayers of the day. Soon the sacred way will once again fill with pilgrims and merchants. The treasuries will hum with commercial activity, and the oracle will resume her role as both divine messenger and practical advisor. But the essential mystery of Delphi will remain, how the pursuit of divine wisdom and the pursuit of earthly prosperity could be not opposing forces, but complementary aspects of a single, harmonious system. Let your consciousness drift with that morning breeze, carrying you through the colonnades where marble columns catch the early light, past the treasuries where the wealth of nations rests in divine protection, up toward the temple where Apollo's wisdom guides both souls and commerce with equal grace. Feel yourself becoming part of this eternal rhythm, where the sacred and the practical flow together like streams converging into a single mighty river. The economic complexities of Delphi dissolve into the timeless peace of divine presence, where all human activities, whether commercial or spiritual, find their proper place in the cosmic order. The weight of silver coins transforms into the lightness of divine favor, while the solid marble of the treasuries becomes as insubstantial as morning mist. You are floating now in the eternal space between earth and heaven, where Apollo's wisdom encompasses all things, making sacred the practical and practical the sacred. Let your breathing slow to match the ancient rhythms of this holy place, where time moves like the eternal flow of pilgrims up the sacred way. Steady, purposeful, peaceful. The mysteries of divine economics settle into your consciousness like sediment in a clear mountain stream, adding depth and richness without disturbing the surface calm. Sleep comes as naturally as the sunrise over Mount Parnassus, carrying with it the gentle wisdom of an ancient world where the sacred and the practical found their perfect, eternal balance.